It was Hannah's idea to trek to the edge of town and find the radio tower that, according to half the locals in Jonasville, didn't actually exist. Personally, I thought chasing after mythological structures was a task best left to small children and conspiracy theorists. But then again, I loved Hannah. She could talk me into an expedition up Mount Everest if she had a mind to, or more accurately, started by asking for a picnic date and just upped the stakes on the way. "Come on, Alex," she said, tugging on my arm as if the success of the mission depended on speed walking our way there. "They say it's defunct, maybe even unsanctioned." "Defunct and unsanctioned, both in the same breath," I remarked. "Now you're really selling it." "Think of it as a mystery," she countered, with that sly smile of hers. "Like one of those escape rooms you hate so much." "Exactly why I'm still hesitating," I shot back, though I let her drag me toward the outskirts of town anyway. Her delight was infectious. 20 minutes later, we were trudging through overgrown brush that said secrets with every gust of wind. A chill crept slowly up my spine, probably due to the temperature drop that came with leaving the city. The town had already been sparse, but here it unfolded into a wordless isolation, the kind that made you check over your shoulder twice. "So tell me again," I pressed, as the radio tower began to loom in the distance like a skeletal finger. "Why do people say it doesn't exist?" Hannah tucked her loose hair behind an ear, the gesture slightly deferential. "Nobody talks about it because it doesn't show on maps. Some parents say horror stories happened here to keep the kids away. Typical, aren't you too old for ghost stories? Routine. Me, I think it's because they just don't want us messing with things best left lost." "Well, you know what they say about curiosity, right?" I grinned, trying to keep things light. But the tower stood tall, bizarrely out of place, casting a remote shadow that bypassed my resolve and settled into something unsettling. "It killed the cat," she said serenely. Then, mimicking me, lucky for me, I'm allergic anyway. The sky had turned a muted gray as we approached the rust-streaked fencing surrounding the tower's base. Tall grass held sounds in the low wind, impatient ticks counting time. The closer we got, the more acute the odd silence became, muffling the normality of our exchanged banter. Was all I managed when an inexplicable vibe surged through the air, connecting dots that refused to show me their picture. "This place feels off." Hannah threw me one of her looks, half bemused, half challenging, her eyes darting over our looming destination. "That's why we're here, remember." We squeezed through a gap in the fence already bent back by previous explorers. I considered that the metal itself felt colder than it should, a raw temperature that emphasized our seclusion. Nothing moved in this enclosure. No birds, scarcely even wind, the kind of suspended animation to make you doubt where the real world ended and the dream began. I hesitated when we reached the small, rust-locked door at the tower's base. Trespassing isn't exactly on my resume, by the way. "Our little secret," Hannah said, wiggling a bobby pin she'd cleverly concealed. A conspirator's promise lurked behind that playful statement. Doesn't need saying, but I went along anyway. Somehow, with her, I always would. She picked at the antiquated lock. Each click echoed abnormally, the final success filled with a finality far deeper than the sharp sound itself. I crossed the threshold as seconds threaded together into a patternless weave, my thoughts blinking stars into a dark. The inside smelt of metal and old static, stale air layering ghost elements of some past frequency. I half suspected we might even hear echoes of forgotten broadcasts if we listened close enough. Climbing steps behind Hannah, I couldn't ignore the way the light didn't quite reach the corners, or how each footfall absorbed awkward space. "Maybe it is kind of cool," I relented as we reached the landing, the view outside suddenly claustrophobic with its wide openness, as though very night itself waited beneath us to swallow whole. "Glad you've come around." Hannah graced me with that impish little smile, but her voice carried quieter than, dipping beneath itself with no real effort on her part. Well, my words hung like breath in the suspended air. What's next? She gestured towards the tower's dilapidated console. Buttons marked by age wear, scratches composing a language I felt I should recognize but didn't quite grasp. Each button threatened another path, unknowing. We find out what it does, she decided, an exploration as inevitable as destiny in her demeanor. All darkness aside, I caught her looking at me, genuine delight playing with the shadows. It was this campaign that bound me as surely as any promise, a shared story posing more questions than answers. And if one hint of rust's scent came freshly carried from below, exists only partly, a dream of something both uncertain and unending. Well, there in that cabin's hovering promises, I thought it best to leave the question unasked. The radio tower loomed over the outskirts of town like a rusted sentinel, visible only from certain angles, appearing as if generations had conspired to forget it. On evenings when there was nothing else to do, like this one, my partner, Jesse, and I often found ourselves drawn to it, a shared fascination with things best left alone. Who built it? Why doesn't anyone talk about this thing? Jesse mused as we trekked through the overgrown brush that wrapped around its base. The metal frame whistled in the breeze, weathered and indifferent. No idea. Town archives don't even mention it, I replied, not for the first time. A rickety ladder snaked its way up into the gloom, disappearing into the low-hanging mist that clung persistently to this ridge. Jesse bit into an apple, tossing the core aside, his casual act unsettlingly loud in the twilight silence. We sat cross-legged on the foundation, our backs pressed against the cold steel legs. An unsettling calm settled over us. It was a place simultaneously forgotten by everything and aware of itself in some deeply discomforting way. The first sign of something wrong was the static. It buzzed faintly at first, a broken frequency seeping past the threshold of audibility. We both heard it, instinctively glancing toward the tower as if expecting to see the sound itself creeping down the metal. "Sounds like an old TV trying to find its channel," Jesse said, trying to play it cool, his voice betraying only a hint of curiosity mingled with unease. "It wasn't doing that last time," I replied, my voice quiet, failing to feign disinterest. And then came the voices, not coherent, but dripping through the static in fragmented pieces. There was something so intensely personal about them, like overhearing a conversation you wish you hadn't. Jesse stood abruptly, craning his neck to see if he could spot any speakers or equipment, but there was nothing except us and the tower. "Weird, right?" Jesse forced a grin, one that faltered under the weight of growing discomfort. "Maybe it's some old broadcast equipment kicking in." "Yeah, maybe," I agreed, not believing my own words. As the sky deepened to purple, the static grew louder, the voices within it more insistent, but never any clearer. We exchanged uneasy glances. "Let's head back," Jesse suggested, more a plea than a proposition. Usually the more fearless of us, even he couldn't shake the feeling that we were in the presence of something that defied sensible explanation. Walking backwards, never turning fully away from the tower, we made our retreat. But the sound followed, persistent, intruding upon the edges of our consciousness. Every time I glanced over my shoulder, I half expected to see something materializing out of the fog, though thankfully there was nothing. Back in the safety of Jesse's kitchen, with tea in hand, we sat in reflective silence, the kind you sit in when normal explanations no longer apply. "What if we went back and climbed it?" Jesse said suddenly, breaking the silence with an idea that felt both thrilling and insane. "Are you serious? What are we going to find up there?" I replied, but part of me was curious. driven by a compulsion that overrode sense and reason. Jesse smirked, a shadow of his usual bravado returning. "I just need to know." We left it at that, both understanding that knowing sometimes comes at a cost. Sometimes we pay in dreams, restless and threaded with echoes of an unnatural frequency, and sometimes with something much more real. Night covered the town, but neither of us slept. The sound crawled its way into our thoughts, a dark companion whispering of things that should have remained silent. I pushed my way through the overgrown brush to unearth the rusted skeleton of the radio tower. A lone sentinel, it protruded against the darkening sky, a monument to something we were never supposed to notice. It shouldn't exist. Not here. Not at the edge of a town barely worthy of a mention on state maps. Yet here it loomed, indifferent to my confusion and the creeping fear that had been gnawing at me ever since I found the detour through Pineview blocked and ended up here. For 3 nights it had called to me in dreams, an incessant humming, like voices on bad reception, blending with my subconscious until I woke in a cold sweat. I could no longer define the line between recognition and hallucination. I had to see it, feel it, verify it was real or not. Sarah would laugh at me, probably consider it one of my ridiculous whims. Yet her laugh no longer carried warmth into our cramped apartment. The chasm between us had begun to feel as insurmountable as the distance I now felt from everything. "Gee, familiar," I could almost hear her saying. "It's just a goddamn tower, Matt. Give it a rest." I wished she were here, just to prove it wasn't all in my head. As I stepped closer, the wind picked up, like nature was conspiring with my anxiety. With each gust, the metal creaked and moaned. The sound was haunting, but it was also oddly comforting, a grotesque lullaby in an otherwise silent world. My flashlight cut through the dense twilight, bathing the old structure in a cold, artificial glow. The base was surrounded by debris, shattered glass, a few rusted tools, and unsettlingly, a child's shoe. Who would bring a child here? Or, I dreaded, who left one? My heart raced, but my feet kept moving forward, as if propelled by their own logic. When I reached the base and looked up, I couldn't see the top. It disappeared into the growing darkness. My hand, sweating and shaky, reached for the tarnished metal of the ladder. Climbing felt instinctual. Each rung seemed to fit the narrative of countless dreams I couldn't quite recall. I ascended higher, carefully, uncertain of the strength of the structure or my sense of bravery. My foot slipped on a step halfway up, and I clung desperately to the bars, my breath catching hard enough to choke me. Finally, I perched on a small platform that overlooked what felt like the entire world. Night had fully claimed the horizon, stars peeking through like pinpricks in a fabric of shadow. It was surreal, beautiful, even if it wasn't so terrifyingly isolating. Here, everything seemed amplified. The sigh of the wind, the subtle vibrations underfoot, the eerie notion that I wasn't alone. "Who are you?" It wasn't spoken, but the question reverberated through my skull like the aftershock of an explosion. A delirious notion that maybe the tower was asking, maybe something else entirely. Then static. Not from a radio, but inside my ears, rattling my bones. I pressed my hands to my head, trying to escape the incessant crackle, only to find silence had returned just as suddenly. My heart still pounded like some primitive drum, demanding logic in a place devoid of it. "Matt." Sarah's voice, soft and curious, echoed as if from the recesses of a dream. I inclined my head to see the specter of her smile in the peripheral shadows. I knew she was not really there. Her presence was born of guilt, of want, manifesting in this impossible place. "Sarah, the apology got lost in my throat. Because what could I say? That I was sorry for leaving, for letting her laugh become a whisper, for being here instead of in the space we both used to share." I looked again, the vision gone. Wind wrapped around the tower, reminders of reality whispering deceitful things. I knew I needed to leave before I unraveled completely. Yet as I hurried down, reversing each careful motion, I realized the tower's very existence would forever linger in the back of my mind. Part of something grander, unknowable. A part of me now tied to its mystery. Back at the base, the world felt different. Or maybe it was me. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a message from Sarah. Routine words, "Where are you?" But they grounded me with a purpose clearer than any spectral vision might. She was still part of my world. Perhaps all that remained was deciding what part of it needed rebuilding. I wanted to hold onto that simplicity. The tower stood unchanged, as if it had never been anything but a silent guardian to its own secrets. As I walked away, I knew some things wouldn't follow me back. Yet as I glanced over my shoulder one last time, the sight of that lone shoe by the base refused to leave my mind. The dreams haven't stopped,